Hello, everyone. I am not sure if I'm live. Facebook is looking kind of weird. Just gonna double check. Yes, I am. I see myself on my phone. All right, we are in business. I'm just gonna set this up in case I have any questions. It's always really hard for me to see the questions in the live producer dashboard. So I'm going to pull it up on my phone in case we have anybody who joins live. I can be sure to see you. All right. Hello everyone. My name is Jessie Sletton and I am a postpartum empowerment coach and the owner and facilitator of this awesome group. We've had a lot of new people join lately, so I just wanted to take a moment to welcome you all warmly. I am honored to have you here with us in part of this, what I like to affectionately call a virtual village for postpartum here. And I am, like I mentioned, a postpartum empowerment coach, as well as a certified lactation counselor, certified postpartum nutrition coach, and I recently received my certification in perinatal mental health through Postpartum Support International. So, as you can see, postpartum is really my jam. I love supporting birthing people after birth and through their postpartum time frame. And I also work with people in their pregnancy to prepare for their postpartum more holistically so that they can feel empowered and confident stepping into that very transformational time frame. So I'm so happy to have you here tonight. On Mondays in this group, we do Milky Mondays, and it's a chance for you all to come and learn about anything that's related to lactation or infant feeding. And as a certified lactation counselor, it's incredibly important to me to be able to provide information that is evidence-based. There is a lot of misinformation, myth, and a lot of what I like to call woo in the world of lactation and postpartum in general. And so it's really important that I provide a safe space for you all to come and get reliable information based on the latest research when it comes to lactation. So that is why we are here tonight for Milky Mondays. And before I dive in, I just want to quickly do a little medical disclaimer here. This is not to be taken as medical advice. This is purely for educational purposes. And as always, I encourage you to speak to your healthcare provider if you have any concerns about your health or any family planning questions or concerns that you might have. So, all right, with that, I am going to get started since we started a few minutes late here. If I do have anybody join live, feel free to say hello and let me know where you're coming in from, and feel free to ask any questions. I'm going to try to capture them on my phone over here as I am giving the training. If I happen to miss you for some reason, I promise I will come back and answer your questions. After the video has been uploaded and posted, I always post the replay because I know we are all busy parents and sometimes it's difficult to make these things live. So if you are watching the replay, feel free to post any questions you might have as well, and I will be sure to go back and answer those too. A lot of talking, you guys. It means I need water. And I don't know if you can hear my dog snoring, but that's what that sound is in the background. She's apparently very tired. So sorry about that if it's distracting. It's a little distracting for me, but gotta love our doggies, right? All right, and really quickly, I just wanted to mention, I have it posted in the description, I do offer one-on-one coaching services and coaching packages where I work with you individually on creating a postpartum plan that meets you where you are in your perinatal journey. And lactation support is just one of the many facets that I offer in my coaching services. Other things included in my coaching services are postpartum planning, that from a holistic perspective. We look at your support systems. We also work together on your nutrition. As a certified postpartum nutrition coach, it is very crucial in my opinion, and as the research has shown as well, that your nutrition is at the center of your experience, so that you are nourished deeply, and it encourages your recovery time and your healing and all of those things, as well as hormonal balance and so many more, so much more. So if you are interested in having that holistic support, please feel free to reach out and schedule a free strategy session with me, and we can just talk about where you are and where you're struggling, and where we could come together and my services could fill in those gaps for you, so that you can feel empowered and supported during your postpartum. All right, let's dive in. So Milky Monday today is all about a really fun question that I see often, and that I hear a lot in really anywhere. A lot of mom groups is where I see this question pop up a lot. But specifically, we're talking about, can you get pregnant while lactating or chest or breastfeeding? Okay, so that's the question we're going to be diving into tonight. So you can expect to learn a few things in this training. I outlined them in the description as well, but just to recap, you can expect to learn what is the LAM method, or Lactation Amenorrhea Method, LAM, as a form of birth control. Okay, so we're going to dive into what is LAM. Then next, we're going to talk about what's the effectiveness of this birth control method. And then we're going to talk about how and why does it work, as well as what can cause a reduction in effectiveness for this form of birth control, which is a really important topic when we're talking about birth control, right? No matter what form it might be. So we're going to dive into all of that tonight. So let's get started with what exactly is Lactation Amenorrhea Method, or LAM. And really, lactational amenorrhea, is just a fancy way of saying that your periods are suppressed because you're lactating. Okay, that's simply all it means. In this birth control method, it's really a way of predicting the return of fertility after childbirth. And it was really first defined in the medical journals in more of a succinct way in this actual label back in 1988 at a conference in Italy. And so before 1988, and before this conference of experts that were congregated here, this method as it's defined was non-existent. Okay, now does that mean that it wasn't being practiced in real life? Of course not. It, of course, has been practiced for centuries, for as long as the human race has been has been having babies and not having babies, right? So I just wanted to give that little tidbit that this name, the LAM name, came about in 1988. All right, something that I really want to make sure is understood is that this form of birth control is temporary. Okay, it is a temporary form of birth control, which I will dive into a little bit more in a few minutes here. And I also want to make sure that we really cover the importance that it might be like a duh, Jessie, but I want to make sure I call it out, that this form of birth control does not protect against STIs, okay, or STDs. All right, so that's two really important things I want to call out. It is temporary and it does not protect you against STIs. So with that said, let's talk about the guidelines for actually using LAM. All right, so there's three major guidelines that you need to follow in order to practice the LAM method successfully, okay? So the first thing is you have to be practicing exclusive nursing. So this means that there is no other form of nutrition the baby is receiving, just at the breast or chest, okay? So no solids, no supplementation with formula, or even supplementation with pumped milk, okay? And I'm going to dive into that a little bit further in a minute here. The other guideline for LAM is that you need to be nursing on demand. So really practicing that responsive feeding, which is following your baby's cues and latching them as often as they want. Okay, now there is a minimum requirement here. So a minimum of every 4 hours during the day, and a minimum of every 6 hours at night, or so, excuse me, no more than 6 hours at night. So you can't, they really recommend not having any longer stretches than 6 hours at night. Okay. And then the last thing that I wanted to cover as a part of this second guideline, and it's just kind of a quick note here, and I'll get into some of the details further too, is that pumping is not actually considered an accurate or an adequate substitute when using lamb. Okay, so I'm going to cover that in a few minutes here, but I want to call that out specifically, that they do not recommend you to replace exclusive at the breast or chest feeding with pumping. Okay. So then the third major guideline is something that they recommend is avoid using pacifiers. And they say this is because you want to be able to be stimulating that letdown reflex as much as possible, okay? So instead of letting your baby suck on a pacifier, they want you to instead be using basically you as the pacifier to really satisfy that sucking reflex through latching and nursing. Just making sure I don't have anybody have questions. I haven't seen any pop in, so I apologize if I'm missing them. But so those are the three major guidelines. Okay. Now there are two qualifications that I'm going to be talking about as well, but those are the three guidelines for practicing lamb. Okay, so let's dive into the effectiveness. Okay, this is a really important conversation piece, obviously. So let's talk about the research. Y'all know me, or you will get to know me, and research is big, as I talked about in the beginning. So a major study that was conducted by the World Health Organization, or WHO, was across 7 countries, and they found that lamb was 98.8 to 99.1% effective while chest or breastfeeding for the first 6 months. Okay. And the study was actually published in 1999, and it followed more than 4,000 women for a full year post-birth. Okay, so that's just kind of like the general information about the study. So something to point out with what I said, what was really important was for the first 6 months. Okay, that's going to be the first qualification. I mentioned there's 2. So when using lamb, your child or you have to be post-birth for 6 months or less. Okay. So they say, so obviously I was surprised actually by this. So if the guidelines of lamb are really strictly followed and you're following those guidelines and the qualifications, it does appear to be a fairly good method of preventing pregnancy. Okay. So as I mentioned, it is temporary because it has to be within the first 6 months of postpartum or post-birth. Okay. And it is also, of course, temporary. And this is kind of like another duh, Jessie thing, but I want to call it out, is that the second qualification is that you have to have lack of menstruation, okay, including spotting. And they define menstruation basically as 2 consecutive days of bleeding and including spotting. Okay, that's also counted as menstruation. So that cannot be existing to be able to use lamb, okay, effectively. Okay, so 6 months or less and no periods. All right, so those are the 2 qualifications. I did want to mention too that this WHO study did, since they followed these women for a year post-birth, they did find that it was still fairly effective past the 6 months, but it did increase significantly in my eyes to 7.4% of women did end up falling pregnant, or birthing people did end up falling pregnant within that year. Okay, so that's why they say 6 months or younger. Anything after that, you start to see a real ramp up in increase of risk of pregnancy. Okay. All right, just going to do a quick pause, make sure I don't have any questions. I don't see anything. So let's dive into how does this work, right? How does this work? So the answer with most things that we talk about is hormones. All right, so there's several hormones that are at play here that kind of work together to really help your body suppress ovulation during lactation. And that's the whole point, right? When you don't ovulate, there is no pregnancy. So let's just kind of briefly talk about that. So the main hormone that's at play here is oxytocin. All right, we talk about this hormone a lot. It's responsible for quite a few things in the body. But as far as this goes, oxytocin actually works together with, and I always mispronounce this, so I'm going to be really intentional with how I say it. Gonadotropin releasing hormone, or GnRH, okay? So those are the two things that we're going to talk about. So oxytocin is actually produced from the stimulation of the nerves in and around your nipples during nursing. And then that in turn sends a signal to your brain that says, okay, I'm getting something here. It's time to suppress the surge of the GnRH hormone that I just mentioned, which is really needed for the ovaries to release the egg. Okay, so oxytocin ramps up and it suppresses that GnRH so that you don't release your eggs or egg. All right, so like I said, if you're not ovulating, you're not going to get pregnant. Something interesting that I wanted to mention here is that research has actually shown that the stimulation of a pump does not have as strong as of an effect on this hormone release as actually feeding at the breast or chest. Okay, so that's why they call out the fact that pumping is not a good substitute for actually at the breast or chest feeding for the LAM method to be effective. All right, so that's how it works. All right, and then the last thing I wanted to cover is, so what can reduce the effectiveness of this form of birth control? And one thing that they call out in the research is you need to be aware if you are returning to work. Okay, so this can obviously create a separation between you and your baby for longer periods of time, which of course can affect, the whole thing that we talked about with LAM guidelines and all of those things, okay? So it's going to kind of disqualify that exclusively breastfeeding, because more than likely you're going to have to try to pump or do whatever that is to, keep up your supply, but it's not going to be actually at the chest or breast, okay? So returning to work can be a factor. Another thing that's related is really any abrupt changes in your nursing pattern, okay? So something that comes to mind when I think about this is nursing strikes from maybe teething, right? Babies really hurting and just refusing the breast or chest to nurse, right? That can cause a disruption. Illness, sometimes when babies are sick, they're stuffy, they can't breathe as well, so they kind of fight feeding. So any of those abrupt changes can really cause a decrease in the effectiveness of LAM. Okay, so those are two of the big major ones. And then the other thing that I always want to mention is that just because you don't have the return of your cycle does not mean that you may not ovulate. Okay, some menstruating people will experience ovulation without menstruation. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. Every body is different, right? And that can happen. So there is that inherent risk. And there's really no hard or fast rule with this, okay? And it's hard to know. It's hard to know if you're going to be one of those people. So that's another thing that you want to keep in mind, okay? So a lot of times when people are looking at the LAM method as far as what they want to do for birth control, they find that their healthcare providers really encourage them to use a backup method, and that's really why, because there is a lot of guidelines, there is a lot of things that can happen along the way that aren't planned, like nursing disruptions. Another one I want to mention too is longer time at night for sleep for baby when they start reaching that coveted longer stretches at night, right? Which is great. But then if you're following the LAM method, you have to understand that that's a disruption in your nursing pattern, and it might break that longer than 6-hour maximum guideline at night, which could affect, how effective the LAM method would be for you. So lots of variables to consider. Some of the upsides is it's free, right? It's free. You don't have to be taking any sort of other contraception if you're just doing the LAM method. So there's really no side effects that you have to worry about. That can happen with some other contraceptive methods. But the downsides are it can be easy to veer away from those guidelines and increase your risk of pregnancy. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it is temporary, and it is also not protective against STIs. Okay, so those are some of the pros and cons to using lamb as a birth control method. So the answer is yes, you can get pregnant while you are lactating, okay? It is always a possibility. However, it is interesting for us to learn and look at the research that lamb can actually be a fairly good method of birth control when it is temporary and when you are practicing the guidelines very strictly after the birth of your baby. All right, everybody, I don't think I had any questions live. If you did, I will be sure to follow through and answer those in the comments. And let me know what you think about this training. Did you learn anything new? What was interesting to you? For me, when I was researching all of this and putting together this training, I was really shocked at how high of an effective rate lamb really was when practiced properly, right? So that was something that I was pretty surprised by. But let me know what you thought. And as always, I will see you all in the group. Please feel free to post anything that you need, any support you might need. And I will see you all again on Friday. We have free coaching Fridays every week where I just really open the floor to let anybody who has any questions or concerns about postpartum, any of the things we cover in this group, nutrition, lactation, self-care planning, all of the things that you might have questions about, I open up the floor for you able to answer or to get answers for those. So I will see you all in the group, and I will definitely see you all back here Friday for Free Coaching Fridays. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and I hope you guys have a good night. Thank you.